Right. So, what are the policy options for governments in responding to cyber activities of terrorists? From the standpoint of a restrictive understanding on cyber terrorism, and what I mean by restrictive understanding is where cyber terrorist activity is conducted using digital technology and targeting another digital network. There are several options that are available for governments. First of all, they could build firewall against illegitimate systems penetration. Now, building firewall against illegitimate systems penetration require uh, governments as well as, and more particularly, actually, the private sectors and any organizations that have the portfolio of managing data in the digital space to acquire a technical capacity of building system security. And system security would require individuals who use that system to have a habit of security in their day-to-day use of the system. So, for example, this could mean um, individual users must change their passwords every now and then, frequently and uh, periodically. Building firewall could also mean that systems must have a well protected, encrypted uh, data for protection for their data. And then the second option is resilience of digital networks to recover after an attack, including redundant infrastructure, backup systems, and readily available patches, updates, and software. In this second uh, countermeasure, we are looking at the possibility that even after all of the possible perpetrators can be located or mapped out, there is still a possibility that a cyber attack took place. And therefore, what's important is not uh, a capability to prevent attacks, not just capability to prevent attack to be successful, because we might be talking about dozens of attempts at breaching security system. So another point of view for cybersecurity is to have resilience into digital networks, and that means to recover from an attack. So let's say a malware has successfully locked out private data that is stored in the system. Then that system still have backups of data that has been locked out, and they are capable of recovering data and recovering the system so that it can serve the users again. And then there's also training and education for human resources for information. Human resources that are required for cybersecurity is abundant. There is a requirement for data managers and data security managers, cybersecurity managers, pen testers. All these human resources must be produced um, in a sufficient amount and high quality. So training and education is a must. So we are looking at essentially policy options that are targeted at uh, cybersecurity in general, rather than particularly to target cyber terrorism. And this is the case because these countermeasures are derived from restrictive understanding on cyberterrorism, where terrorists are considered to be a threat in cyberspace when they are capable of utilizing digital technologies to conduct cyber attacks and produce fear as an outcome of that cyber attack. Right, so now let's take a look at some of the existing measures that are available in the literature of cyberterrorism on how to respond to cyberterrorism. The literature of terrorism studies or international security have come up with some of the alternative options for governments in responding to cyber terrorism. And Lee Jervis did a survey to academics, English-speaking academics, about what are the most effective countermeasures against cyber terrorism. And what we can see here is a list of options or a list of countermeasures prioritized from what seemed to be the most effective one to the least effective one, and what we can see here is that most of the policy measures or countermeasures that are that have been thought about to tackle cyber terrorism seem to differ very little with countermeasures that are available for cybersecurity problems in general. So when academics in the English-speaking world are asked what are the most effective countermeasures against cyber terrorism, their answer would first focus on building resilience or protection of critical infrastructure to protect the digital network and the data that is stored within it, not only from terrorists, but also from other illegitimate or what we call bad actors. This is what we call target hardening. Why is it called target hardening? So it's because all digital networks and data storage are basically targets of hackers, cyber criminals, as well as terrorists. When bad actors are operating in cyberspace, what they target is data. They want to steal data, they want to corrupt data, manipulate data, and they want to change the access to that data. So they want to block access to the data by applying malware and other methods. So here the differentiation between terrorists and other bad actors like hackers and other cyber criminals is in its intention or motivation. Terrorists have intention or motivation to create sudden political and social disruptions through the introduction of fear. The same motivation is not present in general cyber criminals or hackers. They simply want to make profit out of their actions instead of instilling fear or creating sudden political or social disruptions. The second most important is training and education, or educating the public and policymakers of the real possibility that the cyberspace and the digital network are exploited by known terrorist organizations for their goals. Of course, the training and education that we are talking about in the context of cyber terrorism must be aware of the most recent adaptations of terrorist organizations in terms of using the cyberspace or leveraging the digital technology to in pursuit of their goals. And so trainers and educators must be fully abreast about the the most contemporary development or transformation of known terrorist organizations. And I should emphasize here on the known terrorist organizations, because there may be other violent or armed non-state groups in the country that are not designated as terrorist actors or terrorist organizations for some political reason. And so educators, trainers, the government must be clear about what they designate as terrorist organizations, individuals as well as organizations that are designated as terrorists and therefore uh, exempted from freely accessing the cyberspace. Um, and then we also look at greater intelligence, and this means intelligence sharing between not just between states, but also intelligence agencies within the state. So one state usually has more than one intelligence agencies. We call them intelligence community. It's a bunch of agencies within the government that have a portfolio of intelligence gathering and analyses. Greater intelligence is, of course, important in tackling cyber terrorism because, as I said before, um, uh, policymakers and responders, as well as trainers and educators, must be fully abreast. They must be aware of the recent methods of digital adaptation of terrorist organizations. And then we are also looking at other countermeasures like international cooperation. I suppose international cooperation would help states um, in updating their knowledge about the operation of terrorist organizations in cyberspace. And then backup systems. Backup systems is something that is required for all kinds of cyber threats. Cyber threats usually target databases, and so when databases are hacked or locked out by ransomware or malware, uh, governments and other data management agencies must have a backup system to ensure that services can still be provided shortly after the attack took down the system. And then a public-private partnership is very critical in tackling cyber terrorism. Uh, Terrorists will use different platforms to gather data and or to store data and to communicate with others. Platforms are myriad. There are multiple different platforms that can help terrorists communicate in cyberspace or exchange data or perhaps facilitate their fundraising, uh, although it may not facilitate them to conduct cyber attack, but still platforms are plenty, and not all of them are managed thoroughly by their administrators. And so governments must have a functioning cooperation with administrators of digital platforms so that they are uh, 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 so that they can know that when terrorists are operating using their platforms. Um, of course, tackling the root causes of terrorism would uh, rank pretty high, at least in the middle here, because at the end of the day, terrorists would still probably use the cyberspace for their own propaganda, and the most effective way for responding to them is to make the public aware of this propaganda and not to buy this propaganda and critical to be critical to it. And probably the another important point in countermeasures here is international law and norms. It ranked pretty low in the list. It seems that we have uh, skepticism among uh, the survey participants that there could actually be an international law or norms that govern state behavior in cyberspace in terms of responding to cyber terrorism or cyber activities of terrorists. Um, Norms are non-binding, laws are legally binding, so it seems that the world can at least start with the common principles in responding to cyber terrorism, which we will discuss in the next section. All right, now in the previous section, we've looked at policy responses that are derived from the restrictive understanding of cyber terrorism, where cyber terrorism is understood as an attack by terrorists using digital technology and through the digital network and attacking another digital network. Now, we're going to discuss policy responses or policy options against cyber terrorism from the non-restrictive understanding of cyber terrorism. And what I mean by that is the wider or the expanded understanding of how terrorists use the cyberspace. And we understand that terrorists use cyberspace for myriad of different purposes. And so the policy responses for cyber terrorism from this non-restrictive understanding can also vary from one political context to another. But let's have a generalization on this. So first, I would categorize the policy options for non-restrictive understanding of cyber terrorism. The first category is narrative response. So we call this narrative or preventive response. So the narrative strategy is often adopted by democracies in the world facing the challenges of online violent extremism. And it is also categorized as preventive approach because it promotes alternative or counter narratives, and narrative measures rely on the use of narratives or texts. Text can be written or uh, announced, or it can be narrated in podcasts or video learning like the one you're looking at right now. And so it can include text, pictures to deliver messages to counter extremist messages, breaking the foundations of extremist ideologies or encouraging internet users to create these narratives themselves through online and offline public awareness and education. So as you can see, the narrative strategy is geared to respond towards the presence of online extremism. You don't see the same policy option in the restrictive understanding of cyber terrorism, because in a restrictive understanding of cyber terrorism,
Cyberterrorism is understood as an attack in the digital space by terrorists. Uh, Online extremism is not an attack in the digital space, and the perpetrators are not conducting criminal activities in the eyes of the restrictive understanding of cyberterrorism. But in some countries, contents are criminalized and penalized. The perpetrators who created uh, 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 unwanted or criminalized contents can be penalized. So, narrative measures are non legal or non penal measures against online extremism, and they are largely conducted usually in democratic countries. Non democratic countries will not will usually opt for legalization of penalization of content creators who are categorized as online extremists. Narrative measures also include counter narratives campaign, utilizing carefully curated and appealing materials that gain insights from defectors of terrorist groups, those who are already de-radicalized or disengaged from their groups. And these materials or messages from them can be impactful and credible to the audience. Included in the narrative approach is a set of offline and online education and disengagement programs to sway internet users away from online violent extremism. And online alternative narratives and counter message campaigns to address sources of terrorist activities termed as online counter-violent extremism, which comprises of prevention, intervention, and diversion, disengagement and de-radicalization, rehabilitation, and reintegration. Now, narrative approach is not without challenges. It is actually perhaps the most challenging countermeasure in the realm of counterterrorism or anti-terrorism. The challenge of a narrative approach is that counter narratives must counter every aspect of extremist narrative. Messengers or content creators in the business of counter narratives uh, need to create contents that actually respond to the messages from the violent extremist groups or from the terrorists. And this means that every aspect of their ideology must be tackled. Terrorists usually uh, utilize ideologies that can mobilize people. In extremist ideologies, usually the propagandist will use end of times ideology or end of times thoughts, which mean these are the kind of thoughts that would promote which groups in the society would prevail and would become losers at the end of times. Um, the end of times can be a period that is going to precede a revolution or the end of times in religious terms. So it can be anything. And the end of times is a period of radical change. It represents a momentum in the terrorist thinking of when radical change is going to take place. So they often use this in order to mobilize their audience into doing something or thinking of something that would mobilize people to violent extremism. And so counter message content creators must be adept to every twist and turn and revolutions or transformation in terrorist ideology of the end of times, because terrorist ideology is not stagnant. It's constantly changing and adapting to the emotion of the society, what they feel and what they are angry about, what they are critical about, and use that to channel the frustration towards the need for radical violent changes. And it's a challenging aspect of the narrative strategy, because they have to be up to date every time. The message creators, messengers or message creators must also be credible. Credible here means uh, message creators have no known association with establishments. Establishments can be governments, can be large corporations, because once they are indicated to have or detected to have associations with establishments, they would lose credibility. And then there's also a problem of dissemination through maximized role of online platforms. We now live in an era where online platforms are uh, uh, multiplied by many. We have online platforms just for videos, online platforms for texts, online platforms that facilitate uh, uh, end-to-end encrypted communication. And then there's still social media. So, which online platform is going to be utilized to disseminate thoughts that would counter violent extremism? Uh, Content creators can also utilize humor. Humor or jokes can be effective in conveying a message of anything, including counter-violent extremist messages. Humor can subvert messages of power and brutality that are often promoted in violent extremism. And then content creators have to challenge posts of online violent extremists, of those populist far-right hate groups. For counter narratives to be effective, they need to be they need to be distanced from governments and clearly shaped by civil society organizations. Another policy measure that states can adopt in their response against online terrorism is the repressive approach. This is also a very popular category among the nation states, especially the democratic ones, as well as non-democratic ones. And they include takedown approaches. Takedown approaches is where governments block access to particular websites or social media accounts. They can also do filtering of keywords, uh, keywords that you use in search engines. Some keywords may not return any results because they have been filtered not to produce any results. These may be keywords that relate to violent extremism, particular ways of constructing explosive devices. Uh, uh, but takedown approaches and filtering of keywords have not been totally successful, if at all. If determined internet users can use VPN easily to access websites that are forbidden, and to use keywords that are already filtered. And then there are also filtering of results uh, in search engines, so hiding words in searches. Uh, so the principle here, weeding a garden, is important, although weeds will grow back. Uh, that means every time the governments uh, block access to websites and filter keywords, hiding words in searches, uh, terrorists will find a way, another alternative platform that is free from government censorship. But uh, weeding a garden is still important. Attempting or the effort to filter keywords and everything is still important because it's just better than nothing at all. Um, However, we should take note that without further uh, cooperation between government and private sector in filtering and censoring uh, contents of violent extremism online, uh, these takedown approach will not be effective at all. Uh, taking down websites and filtering keywords are also important because this will waste the time of the extremists, that they would require uh, the building of new websites and transferring data from one website to another. And then there are also uh, intelligence approach. The intelligence approach is not actually it's not uh, designed to block access to radical websites or extremist websites. They are not also they are not designed to catch the perpetrators, but rather intelligence approach is designed to track uh, um, perpetrators of online extremism and to predict their next step. So intelligence approach is um, made to gather information and analyze the tactics of terrorists through online access, predicting their next ideology and things like that.